Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, her website taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thanks for having us.
Kris, we had the fiscal update from Ottawa. What's your opinion on what they told us or maybe didn't tell us?
Well, it's really eye-popping when you consider that the last actual budget that they brought down was one of the most overspending budgets we've ever seen in Canadian history. And yet somehow Finance Minister Freeland is still managing to blow that budget. She's actually outpacing the spending that they had already planned for in their last budget, which was ridiculously bloated. In fact, based on the current rate of spending, my federal director there in Ottawa says that in interest payments alone between now and 2027, so within the next 5 years, we're going to spend $200 billion on interest. That's with a B. So we know that they didn't create this entire problem, but they've nearly doubled the federal debt. And even before COVID hit, they were way overspending. They were spending more in the year 2018, 2019, before COVID, than in any 1 year of the Second World War or the Korean War or our recessions, adjusted for inflation. Like, it's mind-boggling. And so unfortunately, the fiscal update was awful. It basically said, we don't care about what we're spending.
They also added, $28 billion in new spending. It seems, because they said, oh, well, we have the room. It's like being told your credit card limit's gone up another 10 grand, so you just go out and spend it.
Yes, on whatever, on big screen TVs or, new fancy boots. We understand that in times of, dire emergency, you need to spend money. So, for example, we're wincing and waiting for it. We don't know what the bill is going to be for this massive reconstruction that they've done of the Coquihalla Highway. But it's an emergency. That's a vital corridor, especially for our trucking traffic. It's essential to get that thing fixed as soon as possible. So, yeah, we know that's going to be expensive. We're bracing ourselves to see the bill. But that's an emergency. In Ottawa, it's like your uncle who's on his fifth store credit card. All of them are maxed out except for the last one. And he's like, oh, I got a bit of room here. I'm gonna go buy, a chandelier with it. They're really unnecessary expenditures going on in Ottawa, and they need to stop. And I think one of the reasons why they're getting away with it is because people are so wrapped up in their own lives with their own problems, with everything that's going on. And so these politicians who have guaranteed salaries coming into their bank accounts are taking advantage of that. We have a distracted populace who are busy with their own lives and their own worries, and so they're getting away with it in Ottawa.
Is there any hope ever, using the word ever, of getting this under control? And if the government did try to cut back spending, would it cause disasters because so many people became dependent on it?
That's a great question. A lot of people have become dependent on it, and we're urging people to not. If you can, make sure you're earning your own money. If you can, make sure you aren't, taking the government up on what they're calling freebie offers. It's not free. It's coming from you, from your own taxes, or your neighbors, or your kids' or grandkids' future taxes. So they don't have an orchard of money trees that they're just picking from. They can't magically generate it. And in fact, when the feds print more money, they use that quite often with their deficit spending. That helps drive inflation. It isn't the only factor, but it's a darn big factor. So when they print more money and when they are deficit spending alongside of it, that adds to inflation. And so that's the cause. Now it's causing a lot of anxiety for a lot of folks when you go to the grocery store or hit the gas pump or what have you. They're really noticing an increase in prices. And they're not doing anything to quell those fears. In fact, they're just dumping gasoline on it.
Well, somebody pointed out when inflation goes up and you pay more for purchases, the government makes more money because of the GST. That depends on, it's a percentage of your purchase. So for them, the higher the inflation rate, the more money the government makes.
And the more money they'll just turn around and waste anyway. And this is where it just starts really getting mind-boggling. And you're right, you can kind of think of inflation almost like a form of a hidden tax, because your money doesn't purchase as much. You go into the store and it's 4%, 6%, 8%, 10% higher. Just anecdotally speaking, I was buying fabric, Christmas print fabric, to make gift bags for my family, which I do every year. Just as an anecdotal example, what usually would have been an $18 per meter, bit of fabric is now $30. So part of that is inflation. Part of that is, of course, the massive uptick in container costs for shipping from overseas. So we've got a serious problem going on here, folks. And unfortunately, the main problem we have with this, apart from the obvious numbers and the bad spending, is that there just seems to be no interest, like no mature interest being taken in getting this under control. And it needs to be a cultural shift. So back in the early 90s, when Preston Manning was leading the Reform Party and was head of the official opposition, he had somebody across the aisle named Paul Martin, who was finance minister. And Preston would stand up and would talk about lower taxes and less waste and, the debt and the deficit, and he'd be tapping his books. And Paul Martin listened. He was finance minister at the time, and he said, this can't be an ideological thing where people are attached to overspending all the time. And back then, the cuts hurt because they'd overspent so much in the 80s, they turned around and they shuttered hospitals. We don't want to have to be in that position a couple of years from now. And so this is where we're asking people, like journalists especially in Ottawa, start asking these questions. Hold these politicians to account. Quit laughing about their socks. Like, we're in serious trouble here, and we're the ones that are going to pay the bills.
Yeah, my Paul Martin story was, we had a $153 billion surplus in the EI fund.
Oh, yeah.
And the pension fund was underfunded. And I said, why don't you just take the surplus in the EI fund and put that into the pension fund? And he said, Jim, I can't do that. That's illegal. And I said, sir, you're the finance minister. You could change that tomorrow. And he just walked away.
Oh, it's too bad he walked away. But it's silly when lawmakers, literal lawmakers, legislators, turn around and say, well, that's what the law says. Dude, you've got the pen in your hand. You write the law. I'm surprised he walked away. That's too bad.
Well, that's what politicians do. Ujjal Dosanjh, when I said, why don't you up the personal exemption for income tax in BC to $25,000 like it is in Alberta?
Yeah.
And he says, well, that means we would give up $3 billion in revenue a year. And I said, so you admit the government runs on the backs of the working poor? And he walked away from answering, continuing with that conversation as well. Politicians, I mean, you can't grab them and say, hey, buddy, I want an answer.
No. But you can buttonhole them in the hallways, or you used to be able to.
Oh, they run.
They
like
do.
I said, they run away.
Nowadays, though, it's even getting harder to do that because there's fewer and fewer people, it seems, that want to show up for work and actually interact with people. And we're really worried about transparency and accountability in that way. So we'll give you an example of the FOI thing happening here in British Columbia. Like, we're flabbergasted that the BC government is slapping a fee onto Freedom of Information requests. Number one, all that information should be proactively posted on the internet anyway. Like, we shouldn't even need to ask for it. These expense reports, these restaurant receipts, these travel bills, all that stuff should be automatically scanned. There's a ton of different types of software you can do it with a couple taps of your thumb on your phone. It's all automatic and should all be posted. But no, not only are they not posting it proactively, they're now going to start nailing you with fees as a journalist or even just as a concerned citizen. to get access to information that's of your government. It's your money they're spending, and that's also emails and plans and agendas that they have that lead to changes in law that affect you. So this is where we're saying they need to be more transparent, not less.
It's a paywall.
It's a paywall. It's a paywall for information. That's exactly what's happening, and it's your information.
And you wonder, what kind of secrets are they trying to hide?
Yeah, exactly. Well, perfect example. So later on, we're going to be seeing an audit report coming down pretty soon here from the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, the TNRD. That's the general region around the city of Kamloops here in BC. And some of your listeners might remember the outstanding work that Jessica Wallace did, reporter for Kamloops This Week, tiny little newspaper, uncovered around $500,000 being spent over 5 years on things like hotels and flights and fancy champagne rooms and steak and fancy dinners at really fancy restaurants, jewelry and gifts and iPads and liquor store cards being given to staff, all on taxpayers' dime. Completely unacceptable. And so, one, there's a massive RCMP investigation going on into the situation right now. And two, we're expecting the auditor report to be coming out soon. So we'll find out exactly what's happening and where the bodies are buried. We need more transparency. If we didn't have open access to information, we would never have heard about this story, ever. Because there's no way that small newspapers would be able to foot these bills.
When John Horgan was in opposition and not the premier, was he not wasn't he against hiking freedom of information fees or imposing them in the first place?
He was, yep. And this is where it all too often happens. They'll say the right things in opposition, and then once a party gains power, they turn around and do the opposite. So it was the same thing with the so-called per-vote subsidy, but we call it politician welfare. They said in the 2017 election, we've got no interest in making taxpayers give money to political parties they don't support. No. Not only did they turn around and impose such fees after, they actually had the audacity to say, it's just temporary. It's a temporary, just to get us over this, current rough patch. We need this fix of taxpayers' money going to political parties. They just voted to extend it, right? I don't think a politician or a bureaucrat has met a quote-unquote temporary program or power that they haven't immediately fallen in love with.
Yes, remember, income tax was a temporary measure imposed on only the 5% richest in Canada to help pay for the First World War.
Yep.
I guess we're still paying.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And here we are, about 100 years later. So this is where we need more transparency, more accountability, more information being posted proactively. But we are, I don't know if I can sound the alarm bell loud enough. We are going in the wrong direction. And especially right now, with all of this money sloshing around during COVID and the lockdowns and the pandemics, we need to know where every dollar is going, and to whom, and why.
Did Ottawa lose $600 billion that they can't track down?
Yeah. They can't account for it. That's a staggering amount of money. They need to figure out where that money went. They're saying that, it's all tied up with, investment banks and stuff like that, and we need to be, really diligent. And yeah, you do. So we don't know why they haven't been able to cough up this information yet. They bloody well better get on it. And now we're also seeing comments with them saying something to the effect of, we don't want our contracts or money that's been given to lobby firms to become public. Apparently it was a Liberal member of Parliament said this at committee this week. That's highly alarming. No, we need to know where every single dollar is going. Because it's way too easy when it's, fog of war, oh my goodness, it's an emergency, everybody throw your hands up and just open up the bank vaults.
Well, it's not exactly like the COVID virus is seeking our country's secrets here.
No.
Yeah, so why can't you tell us about it?
Exactly, and where the money is going. So keep in mind, again, back to FOI. Penny Daflos at CTV used FOI to find out about a public health official here in British Columbia that is partially funded, of course, by BC taxpayers, partially funded by federal taxpayers. It was an outrageous amount of money they were spending. I think the guy was making close to $270,000 a year, and we were renting him an Audi, and we were paying for his lamb chop suppers, and we were paying for massive renovations to his office, apparently, to have a better view. And apparently also they ordered a bunch of masks costing millions and millions of dollars that didn't work. They were flimsy. They fell apart. So that was through FOI that they found out that information. So we absolutely need more of it.
Mm-hmm. We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. It's now time for people to think about their municipal property tax bills. Vancouver, over the last 4 years, has hiked property taxes 25%. Is that reasonable?
The cost of living in Vancouver right now, between taxes and fees and highest and best use, which they apply to a lot of business properties, is just unreachable for most average people. So no, it is not justifiable. We have not seen fiscal discipline at Vancouver City Hall. We have not seen them go meticulously line by line through a budget and really ask themselves, is this a want or a need? Because right now it should be only needs. Absolute 100% needs is what needs to be done right now. And no. So if you compare, for example, the last I was able to check there, Port Coquitlam, they were able to keep their tax increases to below 3%. Which, I'm sure we'd like to see tax cuts or in a complete freeze, but keeping it under 3% is much more decent than what's happening in nearby Vancouver. And they're in a similar geographic region. They have, people sitting on the same Metro Vancouver board, all that very similar level of services. So why is it the Vancouver City Hall can't keep their property tax increases down, and next door and Poco, they're able to?
Vancouver, famous for its single occupancy, self-cleaning, $620,000 toilet. Well, now they're going to buy an electric fire truck that costs $300,000 more than a regular fire truck, which is quite expensive to start with, but it carries 40% less water and still needs diesel auxiliary power to pump the water. Does that make
sounds like Monty Python?
Well,
it does.
I just wonder, how much do fire trucks around the planet contribute to global warming? If every fire truck was lined up and turned on, how much of an effect would that have on the environment? I have a feeling not very much.
Next to nothing.
Yeah.
Next to nothing. As scientists and as our Prime Minister said only once and only in French and didn't repeat it, if Canada stopped everything, I mean everything, like we ceased to exist. We're no longer farming, we're no longer heating our homes, we're not driving trucks, nothing. It wouldn't make an impact globally because of how small we are in population, how big we are geographically, and he wasn't even factoring in our massive forests, which are obvious carbon sinks. So, do we need to do something for pollution in the planet? Absolutely. Are we working from the big end of the arithmetic problem? No. If we're screwing around with average working people here in British Columbia and Canada, one of the coldest places on Earth, up here in Canada, we're not helping. What we should be focusing on is, one, technology. So there's massive gains being made in technology where they're simply turning the lens around. We're not talking about carbon taxes. It isn't government doing it. It's businesses figuring out to use emissions, period. It doesn't matter if it's carbon or whatever. Emissions as a resource. Don't let it float out into the atmosphere. Capture it and turn it into stuff. So there are businesses that turn carbon dioxide into soap, into candles, into diamonds, even into the blue coloring that you see in M&Ms. Like literally, that's what the blue coloring comes from. Because it's a recaptured emissions. And it's at no cost to taxpayers, and it becomes a value-added product. So that's how you turn this around and figure this stuff out. You don't do this by buying an electric fire truck that carries about half of the needed water. How is that going to help somebody's house on fire?
Someone pointed out most fire truck calls are for things like heart attacks and so on. And I said, well, then why are you using a giant fire truck? Why don't you use a smaller rescue vehicle? Why use something so inefficient?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Great question.
Well,
it's the
Vancouver
same sort of thinking that they will block off, downtown city artery streets with, pedestrian thoroughfares or yet another bike lane or whatever, and they make it so cumbersome for you in a vehicle that you have to drive around the block 6 times to get to your proper parking spot. How is that efficient? It's not. And this is where we're always urging for lower taxes, less waste, and smaller accountable government. Because when they get their fingers in there, they almost always mess it up. We'd like to think they have good intentions, but a lot of times they just mess it up by trying to get involved. And so this is where we're really hoping that, I hope that doesn't become the norm. Because we can't be having fire trucks that have half the water required to be on board. I was actually doing some reading. It was a stunning stat, and it was coming from Blair King, who is absolutely brilliant on this. He lives in Langley, and he understands, natural gas, pipelines, all that stuff. And he and I disagree on the carbon tax. He supports the carbon tax. We obviously don't. So there's that. But he's really smart on energy, and he knows what's required. He stated that if we flipped the switch here in BC, say we could all just close our eyes and magically electrify everything. So our trucks, our vehicles, transportation systems, all that stuff, if we flipped everything over to electricity, he said we would need 9 more Site C dams. 9! I couldn't believe it. I was guesstimating maybe we'd need 2 or 3 more. And even that would be a Herculean undertaking to be able to even get that approved or built or up on time. But no, it's 9. So if folks want to start electrifying things, they have to have a serious conversation about how we're going to be able to do that and not bankrupt people.
China, when COVID first hit there, they shut down public travel. Everybody was locked up, or had to stay home. I shouldn't say locked up, although their COVID hospital did have bars on the windows. All their factories were shut down, no freeway traffic. That only reduced their carbon signature by 15%, so they couldn't have met the targets set previously. And now we have the latest climate conference in Scotland, where Canada sent how many delegates?
Around 300, the biggest of any other country as far as we can tell.
And we contribute, what, 2% of global emissions?
Just less than. Yep.
Less than 2%.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And there was a lot of hypocrisy that was involved in that as well, sending that many delegates, and they all got to party and do their thing. And now they're coming back down here to deal with the little people. So yeah, this is again, it gets back down to our fundamentals and our tools that we have at hand. This is why we need the ability to recall federal politicians and municipal politicians. We need to be able to fire them between elections and hold them accountable for their actions. We need more freedom of information. We need more proactive disclosure. We need more of our committees that are being held on Parliament Hill and should be held more at the legislature in Victoria, broadcast, wall to wall, on the record, in translation, all of it. We need to have more accountability because, folks, we could get really in deep here when it comes to our taxes and our spending, and it can really bite us.
Are more carbon taxes on the way in the new year?
Yep, unfortunately. So right now we are at $45 a ton here in British Columbia for the first carbon tax. The second carbon tax is a form of fuel regulation that tax another 14 or 15 cents or so onto the price of gasoline per liter. So combined, it's about 24 cents a liter right now here in BC. And yeah, unfortunately, it's going up to $50 a ton this coming April. So April 1st, it goes up to $50 a ton. But the big jump starts happening after that. It's going to be leaps and bounds because the feds have agreed to put it up to $170 a ton within the next now 8 years, because by 2030, they're going to have it at $170 a ton. To put that in layman's terms, that's going to cost you around $40 to fill up your average family minivan just in the carbon taxes. That's not touching other taxes. It's not touching the cost of fuel. $40.
Oh, interesting times ahead. How's your horse and buggy working out?
Exactly. I don't know how many groceries average people can haul on their bicycles, throughout all of British Columbia. And again, there are some folks who are able to live really small and in urban settings, and that's fine. That's an okay way to live. Not everybody can do that. And so it's going to become really unaffordable really fast. And if you combine things like inflation, it's getting tough. And also keep in mind that carbon taxes apply to home heating as well. So it isn't just people using their gasoline vehicles.
Do farmers have to pay carbon tax?
They sure do. So they don't have to pay carbon tax on what they often call marked diesel. So it's usually colored purple. So that's for their tractors or their trucks that, never physically leave the farm. So that's one. But they do pay carbon tax on natural gas and propane that they use to dry product. So seeds and grains, all that stuff that, goes up the food chain for all of us, that is subject to carbon taxes. I've seen bills sent to me from farmers in the prairies that have thousands of dollars tacked onto them through the carbon tax. It was mind-boggling. And right now, there's a very small private member's bill slowly making its way sort of through the House of Commons, trying to exempt farmers from the carbon tax on things like natural gas and propane, because that is adding to our cost of groceries. And then, of course, the moment it leaves the farm and gets trucked anywhere, so it doesn't matter if it's, beef or crates of eggs or whatever it is, it's on a truck, it's getting carbon taxed. And the diesel is definitely carbon taxed.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for caring. I just really hope people can put their shoulder into it and pay attention to this in the new year.
All the best to the holiday season.
Merry Christmas. Take care.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Is there a place people can contact you, Kris?
I would love for them to email me directly. It's the letter K, Sims, so KSIMS at taxpayer.com. And especially if you're noticing waste. If you're working at the government area and you're noticing waste or misspending, you can whistleblow to us. We will protect your identity and we will look into it.
You can find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.